We're going to move on to the next chapter of microeconomics and talk about economic systems. Now, when we talk about economic systems, we're going to have to think or like keep in the back of our minds the concept of opportunity cost. When considering the different economic systems, we have to consider the opportunity cost of producing one thing over another in different systems, and the question of who gets what in each economic system. And we'll talk more about that when we review each system specifically. The first type of system is the command economy. So in a command economy, the government essentially has all hands on deck to decide what is being produced and how much of each item is being produced. So terms like quotas and production plans are very common in these sort of economies. And some real life examples are the closest real life examples are Cuba and North Korea and previously the USSR. And if you, so essentially in these countries, the government will decide what items the country will produce, how much of each item. They're going to have to make sure that resources to meet each like quota of items is met and all that good stuff. And if you think that sounds really hard to control, it is. It's pretty often that the government just won't get it right, and you end up having shortages and stuff like that. That was very common back when the USSR was still a thing. However, it's important to note that there's never really been such a thing as a like a true command economy. Even Cuba and North Korea, they have like underground economies running that which act sort of like closer to free market or capitalism. So because the quota, like the typical command economy quota system, it doesn't really work out for these countries, which is why these underground economies spring up. So because these exist, there's no such North Korea and Cuba don't really have pure command economies. In command economies, prices are prices for the goods being produced are also determined by the government, as well as things like wage rates, which is why you'll see in like command economies, like a doctor and say a cashier can get paid the same wage, which is beneficial in the sense that there's no like lower class, but then it disincentivizes people from taking on these harder jobs because they're not going to get paid extra for their labor and like all the time that's spent like training to become a doctor and whatnot. On the other side of the spectrum, there's a capitalist economy. In capitalism, producers and consumers decide what is being produced and at what price. So for example, if consumers in like a market for pants, if consumers decide they don't like jeans anymore and they want to switch towards khakis, they're gonna start demanding more khakis, which causes the price of them to go up because they're willing to pay a higher price to obtain this new trend of khakis. And whatever like price that consumers are kind of like willing to offer is sort of like their vote in a sense. And it tells all the producers, hey, we should switch to khakis production or else we're gonna go out of business. Another term within capitalism is allocative efficiency. This just refers to the whole concept of like prices and wages corresponding to how much any individual can consume in a capitalist society. So again, going back to another example, if a society likes lipstick, but they stop liking red lipstick and start liking purple lipstick, then with the power of like the vote that consumers have of like their like a willingness to pay for something, that determines how much products that determines how producers will shift from creating red lipstick to creating purple lipstick, but it also determines labor. So if the buyers are probably willing to pay like 50 cents for a red lipstick, not that many producers would be willing to supply the labor to be producing all that lipstick if they're not going to be paying that much for it. But if the consumers like purple lipstick and they're willing to pay like $10 for a purple lipstick, more producers are gonna like step up, provide labor to produce those products. Or if the consumers start liking red lipstick again, they're willing to pay $10, then the producers will put up the labor for making more red lipstick. This is where like that Adam Smith invisible hand stuff comes in because there's no government that's like regulating everything here, right? I didn't mention the government in this at all. Like this is all just the wants of consumers and the producers coming to meet the said wants. Like it just work. It's odd, but it just kind of works because there's no interference with like what the person wants from the government, or if people are just able to kind of determine what they want on their own, and then that helps the consumer produce things, that helps the consumer make new things that the consumers might be wanting, that spurs innovation, yada yada yada. Like that's why in a more command economy, there's not much innovation. There's not like an incentive to fix what's there because everything's equal in a sense. And the final term, I guess, for this video is the mixed economy. So I don't think actually any like country in the world is purely command or capitalist. Like I mentioned, North Korea and Cuba, they are pretty command economy like, but there are aspects to it that make it not pure command economy with their like underground economies and also the fact that Cuba does experiment a little bit with um like free market capitalism in some places. And then on the other side of the spectrum, even in America, which is like a pretty capitalist society, the government does step in once in a while to like level the playing field in some sense for consumers. So we have like antitrust laws and like the government stepping in to like regulate companies and industries sometimes just to make sure that the companies don't wield too much control essentially. A lot of countries fall closer to the middle and like leaning more towards capitalism. In the next video, we'll be talking about the circular flow diagram, essentially how money moves around in a capitalist economy between like the general four parties in the capitalist society.